I owe you an apology. Not personally, but on behalf of the medical system I was trained in, because for decades we handed people a food pyramid, told them to eat their vegetables, and left out one of the most important pieces of information anyone managing blood sugar could ever have. We never told you that not all vegetables are created equal. We never told you that some of the food sitting in your refrigerator right now, the ones you eat specifically because you believe they are helping you, are doing the exact opposite. We grouped them all together under the same banner of healthy, and we moved on to the next patient. And that, in my professional opinion, was a failure. Not a failure of intention, a failure of depth. And depth is exactly what you deserve. Here's what triggered this particular conversation for me in a very personal way. I had a patient last year, a woman in her late 50s, who had been pre-diabetic for 3 years. She was doing everything right, or so she thought. She had cut out sugar, she had stopped drinking soda, she had started cooking at home almost every night, and she had loaded her meals with vegetables. She came into my office with her glucose log, and I sat there looking at numbers that made no sense on paper. Her fasting glucose was still elevated. Her 2-hour postprandial readings were still climbing week after week. She was frustrated, close to tears actually, and she asked me a question I will never forget. She looked at me and said, "Doctor, I have been eating salads and vegetable soups every single day for 6 months. Why is my blood sugar still this high?" And when I asked her to walk me through exactly what she was eating, I understood immediately. The vegetables she had chosen with the best intentions in the world were some of the worst possible choices for someone trying to stabilize glucose levels. And nobody had ever told her. Nobody in the system had taken 15 minutes to explain the difference. That conversation changed the way I talk to every patient about food. So before we go any further, I want to ask you something directly, and I want you to answer in the comments below this video, honestly, without overthinking it. On a scale from 1 to 10, how confident are you right now that the vegetables you eat every week are actually helping your blood sugar and not quietly working against it? Leave your number below. A 1 means you have no idea what you are doing and you are basically guessing. A 10 means you have studied this deeply and you feel fully informed. Leave your number. I read those comments. I respond when I can. I want to understand where you are starting from because that context matters for the conversation we are having here. And if you are not yet subscribed to this channel, I want to ask you to do that right now. Not because of an algorithm, not because of a generic reminder at the end of a video, but because the kind of information I share here is the kind that almost never comes up in a standard medical appointment. I want to be someone you can come back to, someone whose face you associate with honesty about health. Subscribe so that the next time I share something important, you do not miss it. Now let me explain what is actually happening inside your body when you eat a vegetable and your blood sugar rises anyway. Most people understand sugar on a surface level, or at least they think they do. They know that cake raises blood sugar. They know that white bread is not ideal. But what almost nobody explains clearly is the concept of glycemic load, and more specifically, the role that starch, sugar concentration, and fiber all play together in how your body processes what you eat. Here's the simplest way I can put this. When you eat any carbohydrate, whether it comes from a candy bar or a bowl of vegetable soup, your digestive system breaks it down into glucose. That glucose enters your bloodstream. Your pancreas senses it and releases insulin to carry that glucose into your cells for energy. The problem for people with blood sugar issues is that the pancreas either does not produce enough insulin to handle the load, or the cells have become resistant to its signal, which means glucose stays in the blood longer than it should. That prolonged elevation is the central dysfunction in both prediabetes and type 2 diabetes, and it is responsible for the downstream damage to blood vessels, nerves, kidneys, and eyes that makes these conditions so serious over time. The rate at which any food drives that glucose spike is commonly measured by the glycemic index, but that measure alone is incomplete and can be genuinely misleading. What actually matters more in real-world eating is the glycemic load, which combines the glycemic index of a food with the actual amount of carbohydrate present in a realistic serving of it. A food with a moderate glycemic index but a very large amount of carbohydrate per serving can do far more damage to your glucose than a high glycemic index food that you eat in a tiny portion. Vegetables vary enormously on this scale, and that variation is something most people have simply never been taught. Some vegetables contain almost no net carbohydrate and also carry compounds that actively slow glucose absorption or improve insulin sensitivity. Others are dense with rapidly digestible starch and have more in common metabolically with bread than with the image of a healthy salad. I need you to listen to this message very carefully, because what I'm about to reveal could protect your health and perhaps even save your life. For a long time, I didn't realize the danger that excess blood sugar represented. I discovered that high glucose levels can increase the risk of heart attack, stroke, vision loss, and even amputations. The scariest thing is that type 2 diabetes often acts silently. Many people believe everything is fine when in fact their bodies are already suffering serious damage. And if your blood sugar is high right now, you may be at much greater risk than you imagine. But then I discovered a completely natural method that helped me understand how to balance my blood sugar levels and regain my quality of life. Thousands of people are also discovering this simple method and learning how to naturally reduce excess sugar and avoid the dangers of type 2 diabetes. And there's something important you need to know. All this information is compiled in a special video that we don't know how long will be available. If you want to discover what I discovered and learn a natural way to help control your blood sugar levels, click the link in the first pinned comment now and watch the video before it's taken down. There is also something else at work that makes certain vegetables powerfully protective, and that is a specific type of carbohydrate called resistant starch combined with soluble fiber. These two compounds slow the absorption of glucose dramatically and feed the beneficial bacteria in your gut, which produce short-chain fatty acids that improve insulin sensitivity at the cellular level over time. A landmark study published in the journal Diabetes Care in 2015, involving over 2,200 participants with type 2 diabetes, found that increasing dietary fiber intake by just 7 grams per day was associated with a 26% reduction in the risk of cardiovascular events, which are the leading cause of death in people with blood sugar disorders. 7 grams, that is roughly 2 cups of the right kind of vegetable eaten consistently every day. The right kind. That phrase is doing an enormous amount of work in that sentence, and it is exactly what we are about to unpack together. The first vegetable I want you to know about is broccoli, and I know you have heard this before. You have seen broccoli on every healthy eating list since childhood. But I want to tell you something about broccoli that most people, including many healthcare providers, do not know, something that completely changes the way you should be preparing it and eating it if you want the full metabolic benefit. Broccoli contains a compound called sulforaphane. This is not a marketing term invented by a wellness influencer. This is a real, well-studied phytochemical that activates a cellular pathway called NRF2, which reduces oxidative stress in the cells that line your blood vessels, and, critically, in the beta cells of your pancreas, the very cells responsible for producing insulin. When those cells are under chronic oxidative stress, which happens consistently in people with elevated blood sugar, their ability to produce and secrete insulin declines progressively over time. Sulforaphane acts essentially as a protective shield for those cells, keeping them functional and responsive for longer. A study published in Science Translational Medicine in 2017 found that a concentrated broccoli sprout extract reduced fasting blood glucose by an average of 10% in participants with type 2 diabetes over a 12-week period. 10% from a single plant compound. That is not a rounding error. That is clinically meaningful. But here's the critical detail that almost nobody talks about. Sulforaphane is not present in broccoli in its active form. It is produced through an enzymatic reaction that only happens when the vegetable is chopped or chewed, activating an enzyme called myrosinase that converts a precursor compound into sulforaphane. The problem is that myrosinase is destroyed by heat. This means that if you steam or microwave your broccoli without first letting it sit chopped for about 40 minutes at room temperature, you are dramatically reducing the sulforaphane your body will actually receive. Chop it. Let it sit. Then cook it gently if you prefer it cooked, or eat it raw. That one preparation change costs you nothing, takes 40 minutes of passive time, and significantly changes what your body receives from a food you may already be eating. The second vegetable I want to talk about is one that is often dismissed because it is humble and inexpensive. Cabbage. Green cabbage, red cabbage, Savoy cabbage, all of them are exceptional for blood sugar management, and the reason comes down to several overlapping mechanisms. First, the glycemic load. A full cup of cooked cabbage contains roughly 5 grams of total carbohydrate and about 2 grams of fiber, giving it one of the lowest net carbohydrate counts of any vegetable available in any grocery store in the world. But the benefits go far beyond just being low in carbohydrates. Cabbage is rich in a family of compounds called anthocyanins, particularly in the red and purple varieties. And these pigments have been shown in multiple controlled trials to directly inhibit enzymes in the small intestine that break down complex carbohydrates into glucose. That means red cabbage is not just avoiding a blood sugar spike by being low carb. It is actively slowing the enzymatic process that creates glucose spikes in the first place. Think of it like stationing a traffic controller at the exact point where sugar enters your bloodstream, deliberately slowing the line so that your pancreas never gets hit by a sudden, overwhelming wave that it cannot handle. A study published in the European Journal of Nutrition in 2012 examined the effects of anthocyanin-rich foods in 67 individuals with metabolic syndrome and found significant reductions in fasting insulin levels and meaningful improvements in insulin sensitivity scores after just 8 weeks of consistent consumption. 8 weeks, not a year, not a decade of dietary discipline. 8 weeks of eating more red cabbage. Cabbage is also extraordinarily versatile in ways that make it easy to actually eat consistently. You can ferment it into sauerkraut, which adds the additional benefit of live probiotics that support gut health, which, as I mentioned, has a direct connection to insulin sensitivity through the short-chain fatty acid pathway. You can eat it raw in slaws dressed with olive oil and lemon. You can braise it slowly in soups and stews. You can roast wedges of it at high heat until the edges caramelize, and the flavor becomes something almost sweet without containing the sugars of sweet foods. There is genuinely no wrong way to eat more cabbage. The third vegetable is one that surprises nearly every patient I bring it up with, and that is asparagus. I want to tell you about a patient of mine named Michael. He was 62 years old, had been managing type 2 diabetes for 7 years, and had hit what he described to me as a complete wall with his numbers. He was on medication, he was walking every morning, he had cut out most processed food, and his A1C had been stubbornly parked at 7.4 for over a year. Nothing was moving it. We went through his diet together in detail, and one of several changes I suggested was adding asparagus consistently to his dinner 3 to 4 nights per week. He looked at me across the desk with the expression of a man who has tried everything and is not particularly impressed by the suggestion of a green vegetable. But he did it. 6 months later, his A1C had dropped to 6.8. Now I want to be careful here because I am not telling you asparagus alone achieved that result. There were other adjustments in his diet and lifestyle, but asparagus was a consistent, meaningful contributor to a result that had eluded him for over a year. Here is the mechanism behind why. Asparagus contains a compound called inulin, which is a prebiotic fiber that selectively feeds specific strains of beneficial gut bacteria, particularly Bifidobacterium and Lactobacillus. These bacteria, when consistently well-nourished, produce short-chain fatty acids including butyrate, which has been shown in research to reduce hepatic glucose output. That phrase means it actually lowers the amount of glucose your liver releases into your bloodstream, even during periods when you are not eating, including overnight. Your liver, in people with insulin resistance, tends to release excessive glucose during fasting periods, particularly in the early morning hours, which is why many people see elevated fasting glucose readings even on mornings after a dinner that was perfectly controlled. Addressing that overnight hepatic glucose release is one of the most powerful and underappreciated levers in blood sugar management, and improving it through gut bacteria is an approach that almost never comes up in standard dietary advice. Asparagus is also a natural diuretic, which helps reduce the water retention that is common in people with metabolic dysfunction, and it is meaningfully rich in chromium, a mineral that has been shown to enhance the sensitivity of cell receptors to insulin, essentially making the key fit the lock more efficiently. At just 4 grams of net carbohydrates per cup, asparagus delivers all of this at essentially zero glycemic cost. Now I need to talk about the vegetables that deserve far more careful attention than they typically receive. And I want to be extremely clear before I do. These are not poisonous foods. They are not categorically forbidden. But for someone who is actively trying to manage blood sugar, eating these without understanding their specific metabolic impact is one of the most common silent mistakes I observe in my practice. And it is painful to see every single time because the person sitting across from me genuinely believed they were doing everything right. The first vegetable that requires much more thoughtful consideration is corn. And I know technically corn is classified as a grain, but the way most people consume it and think about it places it firmly in the vegetable category, particularly in the form of corn on the cob, eaten at summer cookouts, frozen corn stirred into soups, or canned corn added to salads. A single ear of corn contains roughly 25 to 30 grams of digestible carbohydrates and has a glycemic index of around 52, which places it in the moderate range on paper. But the glycemic load of a full serving of corn is significantly higher than most people realize, particularly when it is eaten alongside other starchy foods, which it almost always is. Corn rarely appears on a plate alone. It appears next to rice, beside potatoes, mixed into dishes with bread. The cumulative glucose load of those combinations is dramatic. There is also a deeper issue with corn as it exists in the modern food supply. Most commercially available corn varieties, the ones sold in grocery stores across the country, have been selectively bred over decades to be sweeter and starchier than their ancestors. The natural resistant starch content that gave traditional corn varieties some protective value has been largely engineered out of the dominant commercial cultivars in pursuit of sweetness and yield. A study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition in 2009, tracking the dietary patterns of over 4,000 women over a 12-year follow-up period, found that high consumption of foods with elevated glycemic load, a category that consistently included corn in its most common forms, was associated with a 68% higher risk of developing type 2 diabetes compared to the lowest consumption group. 68%? I am not asking you to never eat corn again. I am asking you to stop treating it as a free vegetable that requires no accounting. The second vegetable that requires more honest awareness is the potato. I fully anticipate some resistance here because potatoes have been part of human diets for thousands of years. They carry real cultural weight for many families. And they do contain genuine nutrients, including potassium and vitamin C. I understand all of that, but the metabolic reality is unavoidable. A medium white potato has a glycemic index of between 70 and 85 depending on preparation, placing it in the high category right alongside white bread. The starch in a freshly cooked hot potato is almost entirely rapidly digestible, meaning it converts to blood glucose very quickly. Now, there is one important nuance most doctors never mention. If you cook a potato and then refrigerate it overnight before eating it cold or gently reheated, a significant portion of that starch converts into resistant starch through a process called retrogradation. A cold potato salad made the day before behaves quite differently in your bloodstream than a freshly baked hot potato from the oven. The refrigeration step is real and meaningful, but even with that adjustment, the potato requires careful portioning for anyone managing glucose levels, and it should never anchor a meal without a significant source of fiber, protein, or healthy fat alongside it to buffer the glucose response. The third vegetable that I want you to reconsider carefully is beets. I know this one is going to be controversial because beets have been elevated in wellness culture to almost superfood status. And they do have genuine benefits, particularly for blood pressure and athletic endurance due to their high nitrate content. Those benefits are real and I would never dismiss them. But for blood sugar specifically, beets are among the highest glycemic vegetables available in the produce section. Their glycemic index sits at around 64, and while their glycemic load per typical small serving is technically moderate, The problem is that most people do not eat beets in the modest 2 to 3 tablespoon portions that keep them in the moderate range. Beets tend to be eaten in larger quantities, roasted whole, sliced generously on salads, or most dangerously consumed in juice form. Beet juice in particular is a concentrated source of rapidly absorbed sugar, with almost no fiber remaining to slow its absorption. And I have seen blood glucose readings spike dramatically in patients who added daily beet juice to their morning routine because someone in a wellness space told them it was therapeutic and healing. The nitrates are real. The blood pressure benefit is real. The antioxidants are real. But if your primary metabolic concern is blood sugar, beets are not the foundation to build your vegetable intake around, and beet juice should be approached with serious caution and ideally discussed with your physician before becoming a daily habit. Let me take a moment here and be honest with you about something that sits uncomfortably with me. Every time I make a video that challenges conventional healthy eating wisdom, I get messages from people who feel frustrated, confused, and sometimes genuinely betrayed. They write things like, "I have been eating these foods faithfully for years. I have been telling my children they are healthy. Why did nobody tell me this before?" And I want you to hear me very clearly when I say this. It was not your fault. The nutrition information that circulates through mainstream media, through standard public health guidelines, through most general practice medical appointments, is heavily shaped by food industry influence, by oversimplified recommendations designed for statistical populations rather than for individuals with specific metabolic needs, and by a medical culture that has historically been far better at treating the consequences of chronic disease than at equipping people to prevent those consequences through precise food knowledge. You did not receive bad intentions from the system. You received incomplete information, and that incompleteness has real consequences in the bodies of real people who are genuinely trying their best. I see those consequences every single week. That is why I keep making these videos and why I am grateful every time someone watches one of them. Let me bring this home for you now. Let me tell you what I want you to actually do after you finish watching this. Not just save for later, but do today and this week. The first thing I want you to do is look back at the vegetables that made up the majority of your meals over the past 7 days, and simply ask whether each one falls on the protective side or the caution side of the conversation we just had. You do not need to throw anything out. You just need to start seeing your vegetables with more precision than you probably have before today. The second thing I want you to do is add broccoli to at least 3 meals this week, using the preparation method we discussed. Chop it first. Let it sit at room temperature for 40 minutes before you apply any heat. That single step costs you nothing and meaningfully increases the sulforaphane your body receives. The third thing I want you to try is replacing one starchy vegetable in one meal each day this week with either cabbage or asparagus. Not permanently, just for 7 days. If you track your glucose, pay close attention to your 2-hour readings on those days compared to your baseline. The data that lives in your own body is ultimately more convincing than any study I can cite. The fourth thing I am asking you to do is examine what is in any vegetable juice you consume regularly. Beet juice, carrot juice, and corn-based vegetable blends can carry a glycemic punch that rivals commercial fruit juice, and many people are drinking these daily under the belief that they represent optimal health choices. Read the labels. Know what you are consuming. The fifth thing I want you to consider is bringing this specific conversation to your next doctor or dietitian appointment. Ask your provider to help you interpret your blood glucose patterns in light of the specific vegetables you are eating, not just the general category of vegetables as a unified healthy food group. Tell me in the comments which vegetable we discussed today surprised you the most. Was it broccoli, with the preparation detail that changes how much therapeutic value you actually receive from it? Was it corn, which most of us have spent our whole lives classifying as a vegetable without realizing its glucose impact? Was it beets, despite everything the wellness industry has said about them? Name the vegetable. Name what changed for you. Those specific answers help me understand what to explain more deeply in future videos, and they help other people watching feel less alone in their confusion. And please, if you know someone right now, a parent, a sibling, a partner, a close friend, someone who has been told they are pre-diabetic, or who is already managing type 2 diabetes and trying sincerely to eat well, please share this video with them today. You do not need to send a long message, just send it. Because the information gap we described today is real and widespread, and the people you care about deserve to have it closed. My name is Dr. James Harwell, and I have spent over 20 years working alongside patients whose metabolic health changed not through dramatic medical interventions, but through small, precise, consistently informed choices made day after day. That is where real change lives, not in the dramatic gesture, but in the daily decision that is guided by real information. This channel exists because I believe deeply that you deserve that same precision, regardless of whether you have the access or the insurance or the time to sit with a specialist who will explain all of this in detail. The questions you ask in the comments here, the stories you share about what you have tried and what has not worked and what surprised you, those conversations shape what I bring to you next. So keep them coming. And please remember that everything shared in this video is for educational purposes only and is not intended to replace personalized medical advice from your own physician or qualified healthcare provider. Your blood sugar, your history, your medications, and your metabolic profile are unique to you, and your care should always be tailored to your specific situation by someone who knows it. What I can offer you through this channel is context, scientific depth, and a genuine commitment to making sure that the information reaching you is as accurate and as practically useful as I can make it. I will see you in the next one.